Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight, whether in person or joining via the live stream. My name is Ben Marcus, and I'm a junior here at Brown, studying biology and economics. As well, I'm the president of the College Republicans here at Brown. So, why are we discussing the effects that electric vehicles have on the environment tonight? Well, we've all heard in the news about all of the great things about electric vehicles, but is there more to it? Right? There are serious concerns surrounding electric vehicles that we might hear about tonight: lithium batteries, energy demands, the feasibility of the implementation of nationwide charging stations, right, that deserve critical attention. This summer, I realized that hosting a debate on a topic like this, something eye-catching with real-life effects, could serve a greater purpose. We all love to disagree on campus, but how can we even begin to debate each other when we're not even listening? The purpose of the debate is to show that differing opinions are a natural and healthy part of life. More importantly, civil discussion can lead to mutual understanding and overall improvement if done correctly. Before we begin, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the Student Activities Office, who is joining us tonight, Jody and Gita for their logistical support, really appreciated. The Watson Institute, OIED, and the Adolph Kors Foundation for helping sponsor the event, and a special thank you to our speakers here tonight, along with the entire Steamboat Institute team for making all of this possible. I'd now like to introduce Haley Wisniewski, the VP for Development at the Steamboat Institute.
Well, thank you so much, Ben, and let me echo your thanks to our partners here at Brown, the College Republicans at Brown, the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity, and everyone at Brown who helped make this possible, including support from the Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs. We're thrilled to be on Brown's campus for the first time and excited to have this as the kickoff debate for our fall Campus Liberty Tour. We have 6 more debates on the way this fall, so stay tuned for more information on that after the debate. And thank you, as Ben said, to everyone who's here with us tonight and everyone watching online. The Steamboat Institute was founded in 2008 with the purpose of educating people about America's constitutional principles and fostering an appreciation of the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans. We launched the Campus Liberty Tour in 2018 with the goal of pushing back against cancel culture and inspiring free and robust debate. We hope you leave this debate with new ideas and the tools to have productive and substantive conversations with those around you. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, Steamboat Institute relies on the generous support of individuals and foundations to host programs like this debate. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Adolph Kors Foundation, the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, the Jack Roth Charitable Foundation, the Lyndon Harry Bradley Foundation, the Anschutz Foundation, and the Tina Snyder Foundation for their steadfast support of this program. Tonight's debate will explore the resolution, "Electric vehicles are good for the planet." At this time, I want to remind everyone to participate in our pre-debate poll using those cards at your seats, and we'll ask the same question at the end of the debate to see if our debaters have changed anyone's opinions. You can also use the QR codes at your seat to ask the debaters questions throughout the evening. Arguing the affirmative, we have Brown University's very own Professor of Environmental and Planetary Science, Dr. Kim Cobb. Prior to joining Brown in 2022, Kim served as Director of the Global Change Program at Georgia Institute of Technology, Professor in the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, and Advanced Professor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She received an NSF Career Award, a Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, and the Hans Oeschger Medal from the European Geosciences Union. In 2023, she was appointed to President Biden's Intelligence Advisory Board and was elected as one of the 2023 American Geophysical Union Fellows. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Kim Cobb. Arguing the negative is Benji Backer. Benji is the founder and president of the American Conservation Coalition and author of The Conservative Environmentalist. He has represented a right-of-center environmental viewpoint nationally and testified among climate activists such as Greta Thunberg in Congress. A contributor to national media outlets, Benji is also a member of Bridge USA, the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences Climate Change Commission. His recognition includes being named to the Fortune 40 Under 40, Forbes 30 Under 30, and Green Biz 30 Under 30. Please welcome Benji Backer. And last but not least, moderating tonight's debate is Steamboat Institute Blankley Fellow George Bogden. And with that, I will let George take it away.
Haley, and I have to thank everyone who gathered here this evening as well. It's great to see you, even making it out through the rain. Thank you very much for that as well. So this evening we're going to have a slightly structured debate, but it's going to be pretty free-form. So the first thing that we have to do is vote on the resolution right now so that we can kind of have a sense of how everyone feels on the topic beforehand. None of this will come out until the end. At the end, we'll vote once more, and up on the projector, they'll put how people felt before the debate, how they felt after. I think it'd be an interesting data point for how things went this evening. So go ahead and do that. While you're voting, I'll let you know that we have an opening statement by each speaker, which will last 5 minutes. Then we'll move into a kind of structured conversation where any questions that you submit with that QR code will show up on one of my tablets here, and I'll be reviewing those and posing them to the speakers, also interjecting some of my own questions. And then when we reach the end, there'll be closing statements by each speaker, again, 5 minutes. And we'll bring a concluding vote. And with that, I think I should hand it off to our opener, Dr. Cobb.
Okay, thanks a lot. It's really exciting to be here tonight. It's exciting to see so many people want to nerd out about EVs on a very rainy evening like this. So I want to thank the Steamboat Institute and my fellow speakers for this opportunity to dig into this issue, and looking forward to the discussion. Great, there it is, right, my opening slide. So I only have 3 slides. Don't worry, I'm not going to turn into a professor on you or anything. But I did want to open my comments tonight with some thoughts for those in the path of Hurricane Helene, which is projected to hit the Florida Panhandle as a Category 3 or 4 storm. Earlier this year, Hurricane Beryl, a Category 1 storm at landfall, was responsible for 36 deaths and over $6 billion in damages in Texas alone. 2023 shattered all records for the number of billion-dollar disasters in this country, 28 in a single year, costing our economy over $100 billion. That was a cheap year. In 2017, climate-fueled disasters cost American taxpayers an estimated $400 billion. This year, we are 95% certain to witness another all-time global temperature record, the first year we will actually breach the number of 1.5 degrees of warming, the number agreed to as a limit for human-caused warming this century in Paris. Unfortunately, global emissions are still growing every year, albeit more slowly at 1% per year. Here in the US, emissions fell 2% last year. Nowhere near enough to accomplish the 50% reduction by 2030 target set in Paris. Every year of lost momentum translates into more suffering and loss that will extend over a much longer time frame. If we get our act together fast, we can reserve the right to reverse global warming in the lifetimes of the students assembled here this evening. Transportation is the largest source of US emissions, with the vast majority of those emissions linked to passenger cars, SUVs, and trucks. Transportation also accounts for roughly a quarter of global emissions. So it stands to reason that we cannot make significant progress towards our ambitious emission goals without transitioning passenger vehicles away from fossil fuels. To be sure, electrifying cars, SUVs, and trucks is not the only way to go about this. As an avid bike commuter and mass transit rider myself, I hope that we can wean ourselves away from our car-dependent culture. However, given our cities and transportation infrastructure that we have, it's clear that electrifying passenger vehicles is a must. Every spring, I teach a class on climate solutions, EAPS 360 for those of you who are Brown students. I remember 10 years ago talking about EVs as a decidedly mixed bag. In many places, the grid was still so fossil fuel intensive that it made more sense to drive a fuel-efficient gas car or a hybrid. The sticker prices were astronomical, and the range hovered around 100 miles. Fast forward to today, and there is nowhere in America where the life cycle emissions of an EV aren't lower than their gas and hybrid counterparts, and the grid continues to decarbonize every year. EV costs have plummeted, with lifetime ownership costs roughly $3,000 cheaper than a comparable gas car, primarily owing to lower maintenance and fuel costs. And thanks to improved battery technology, EV ranges now fall between 200 and 300 miles, sufficient for the day-to-day needs of almost every American, the vast majority of whom drive less than 100 miles per day. EVs are not just better for the environment, they are markedly better for human health. Pollution from fossil fuels is responsible for more than 8 million deaths per year globally. That's compared to 7 million deaths for the entire COVID-19 pandemic, and 25,000 deaths per year in the United States. Beyond human suffering, the economic toll of air pollution is absolutely staggering, a total of $800 billion per year in the United States alone. For all these reasons, consumers around the world are snapping up EVs at a blistering pace. Year-on-year EV sales growth is 25% globally and 20% in the US. I wish my Stark portfolio looked like that. With 75% of the EVs sold in the US made in North America, the EV boom supports 180,000 jobs across the country and growing, including in communities across Georgia, where Republican Governor Kemp has brokered deals for EV and battery companies that brought $31 billion of investment and 40,000 jobs to the state. However, American competitiveness in this exploding domestic and global market is far from secured. We are losing ground to China every year, which is producing over half of the EVs that are sold around the world. When it comes to ensuring America's success in the ever lower carbon 21st century economy, we must continue to support the burgeoning US EV market. Speaking of battery supply chains, there is no doubt that the mining of critical minerals for batteries is associated with labor abuses and lasting environmental damage at mining sites around the world. In general, increasing the ability to trace critical minerals from the mine through the battery component production to the end use, the so-called battery passport, is frequently cited as the best way to improve labor and environmental practices associated with critical minerals. In the next decades, battery recycling will also play a key role in reducing demand for mining of critical minerals, as will continued improvements in battery technology that are emerging from research labs all over America, including here at Brown. In summary, EVs are a no-brainer. As a happy owner of 2 EVs powered mostly from solar panels on my own roof, I can attest to their performance, their low cost of ownership, and the intangible value of reducing one additional source of harmful, costly fossil fuel emissions. Thanks for being here.
Benji, please, we'd love to hear your response.
Awesome. How are we? Good. All right. My name is Benji Backer. I am the founder and executive chairman of the largest conservative environmental organization in the country, which is now more of a normal thing to say. For a while, it seemed like conservatives didn't have a voice at the table. And we have a really large presence in about 220 communities across the country, trying to show Americans and politicians that the environment and climate are nonpartisan issues, and that protecting those issues is something that all Americans can share. Before getting into tonight's topic, I want to just thank everyone for being here, because it's really easy to show up to something that's not solutions-oriented and just is a bickering debate between people who don't actually want to solve a problem. But here tonight, you will hear us talk about how we can actually find solutions, which is something that's incredibly rare and is obviously not what we're seeing at the national level with the presidential debate. So, are electric vehicles good for the environment? That's the resolution that we just voted on. And while I believe that they are very helpful for the environment in many ways, the answer is that it's very, very complicated. So a little bit of a background. So the reason I put this slide together is to show you that I'm not just an anti-EV guy who's standing up here to tell you about how bad EVs are because I'm paid off by the fossil fuel industry, because none of those things are true. So I just want to get that out of the way. That picture of me on the left is me in the midst of a 60-day tour around the country that I did in an electric vehicle. I visited 38 states in a Tesla that was donated by a donor of ours. And for that trip, now I didn't get the car forever, don't worry. But that's Conrad Anker, a famous climber who is a big proponent of electric vehicles as well, also just a totally awesome human being. And there's an NBC story of me driving the car on that road trip on the top right. So I'm a proponent of EVs. I've enjoyed driving EVs. And in fact, I recently bought my first car that wasn't my parents'. And it was a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. And I'll explain why I did that instead of a normal electric vehicle. But it gets 28 miles electric, and then it can turn to gas after that, which I tend to go on a lot of hiking trips. So it's very nice. All right, so the reason why I'm here arguing the con position is because I actually think that to say that they are blatantly good for the environment is something that harms the environment. That mindset is something that harms the environment, and that we're over-fixating our funds that we're allocating to fighting climate change, because we both agree that climate change is a problem, to electric vehicles, and that there might be better alternatives out there, and that we might be wasting our dollars on this. So the first study that I have up here is that current electric vehicle subsidies fail to reduce overall emissions, says Harvard Law study. There have been a bunch of studies that show that the embracing of electric vehicle subsidies, while they help with adoption of electric vehicles, don't actually make a dent in carbon emissions. But why is that? These are 3 charts, and I have probably like 3 minutes left, so this is going to be an interesting, quick synopsis. But these are from my book, which I took EPA data and the data from the different electric vehicle manufacturers. When you make an electric vehicle, you start at a big carbon deficit, because the carbon emissions that it takes to create the battery that you have to mine from minerals in China and elsewhere are using coal to power the mines. And so you have to drive about 20,000 miles on an electric vehicle, as you'll see here, to even break even in many scenarios. So the top left graph is an electric vehicle compared to the internal combustion engines and hybrids on a 100% coal grid. Obviously, we don't live in a 100% coal grid. The middle one is 100% renewables. We also don't live in 100% renewables as a grid. The top right is the current usage of American energy, with about 23% coal. It's obviously decreasing very substantially, as well as natural gas and renewables. As you can see, the top of the graph is where it starts to break even. Electric vehicles start to save carbon emissions. So the positive is saving carbon emissions. The bottom is contributing to carbon emissions. And as you'll see with the different scenarios, electric vehicles tend to really struggle to cross that chasm of being good for the environment without it being 100% powered by renewables, which, as we'll get into, I'm sure, tonight, is not really possible. There's also a real struggle with the electric vehicle mining and for the lithium and the different cobalt materials that are in electric vehicles. It not just destroys the environment and uses coal to power this destruction, but it also destroys natural landscapes. So these are just a few headlines. Cameroon villagers are saying that Chinese miners are ruining local environments. China is destroying an ancient Buddhist city to get the copper buried there. Chinese mining is destroying Afghanistan's historic ruins. Notice a trend, they're in developing countries. And it's also having a price, it's coming at a price for indigenous people here in the United States. And the non-environmental impacts. So right now, EV tax credits are mostly accepted, over 80% of which are accepted by people who make over $100,000 per year. China has complete control over the electric vehicle supply chain, and we're spending $50,000 per electric vehicle sold on subsidies. $50,000 per electric vehicle sold. $22 billion in 2021, and if you allocate that per person in the United States, that's a lot of money that we're giving. Which is why Toyota chairman Akio Toyoda predicted that the maximum EV share in the world was going to be about 30%, and that they were going to be backing off their EV targets. So in summary, I know I have to wrap up here. EVs are very helpful. I'm a proponent of EVs. I drive an EV, but they are not a panacea. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars around the world for something that barely reduces emissions in the scheme of things. And the end result of what hopefully we can come to tonight is that EVs are a part of the mix, but not the only solution to solving climate change, and that we need to have a much more rich dialogue about how we get to the solutions rather than just putting all of our eggs in this basket. Thank you.
Well, I have to thank both of our speakers for extraordinary remarks that certainly led me to think about topics that I hadn't as I researched this really interesting subject. If I may, I wanted to just start off a bit by broadening the debate or the terms of the debate. And the question that I want to pose is about what some have called the kind of revolution in work from home. And I wonder, in 20 years' time, will we consider the whole debate over electric vehicles, to have been a little bit of something of a white elephant discussion, that so many people are going to not need cars, that, on balance, the emissions are going to, balance out. How would you address that particular change we see happening in our society?
I can start with that because some of these graphs I was looking at are ringing in my head. And I have to note that for the students out there, I felt like a student today all over again, cramming for a midterm for this discussion. So I've seen this graph in my head when I'm talking about this. But the fact of the matter is that passenger vehicle miles traveled in this country have remained pretty level over the last, 10 years or so. It's kind of amazing in a way because, COVID, it took a small dip and then it actually just bounced right back to pre-COVID levels. And so as much as we are working from home, we're obviously accessing transportation perhaps in new and different ways, but that's not going to change in the near future. Now, I did reference my ideas for, I bike to work and I take mass transit, and I think that I very much hope that we become less car dependent through time, but the data do not support that to this point. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Amazon just asked for 5 days a week back in the office to their employees, which sounds horrible as someone who does not work from an office. So I feel bad for those people. But I also realize that is something that people are realizing. I mean, I run an organization with 32 full-time staff. We have 8 people in D.C. who work in person, and the rest of the 24 get lucky enough where they just aren't in D.C. so they don't have to go into the office. They won't want me to say this, but the 8 in D.C. do end up doing a little bit more work and actually following through on things a little bit more. And so I don't know if companies are going to allow people to continue working from home as much as they did during COVID. I think it will be more flexible. But to your point, people are taking a lot of road trips and being out on the road a lot more. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. The other thing that's really important to note is that it seems like people are finding more ways to travel as society continues to advance in technology. And so what I feel like with the electric vehicle discussion is maybe we're not thinking big enough. Maybe we're not thinking big enough about what the solution to these things is. And what I mean by that is I agree, taking cars off the road would be a great thing from multiple standpoints. But what if we had, flying pods? What if we had different things that we haven't even thought of yet that are bigger solutions than just a slight tweak in an old technology that we have? We think about, a car is so much different than horse and buggy. What's the next step to that process? And I don't think any of us have that answer. Otherwise, we would be, trillionaires. But there is an opportunity out there, I think, past EVs to continue transporting ourselves places in a world where we want to go places. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
And pile on there, you're about to get on the Acela after this event over to Boston, and that's how you got here. And I go to DC every month on the Acela for my appointment with the administration. So, it's not a leap too far to look to Europe, to look to Asia and see what our future could be in medium range transit, right? So we can continue to use cars and perhaps multimodal transport in urban environments and move to a model where we have robust train infrastructure across this country where you could travel from here to DC in 3 hours instead of 7. That kind of thing is a game changer, and there are tons of barriers to doing that in this country, which we're not going to go into, but that there's definitely an alternative out there if we wanted to reach for it. Hundreds of billions of dollars later, but we have to where are we going to put our hundreds of billions of dollars, right, is kind of the questions we're here to talk about.
And I think, I live out in the West in Arizona, and so it's a little bit harder to take a train places. It's very easy to get around here via train, which is something I've enjoyed doing. But I think one of the main things that I come to think of when I think of EVs is that the solutions are going to be different for different people in different geographies. If I lived in the Northeast, I would drive an electric vehicle, a solely electric vehicle. But I live in a place where I'm taking a lot of hiking trips and I'm going on long, drives, and I would prefer not to have to wait at a charging station for an hour, and I would also prefer to not have to worry about what time I'm charging or if I have to reserve a charger or any of those things. Because when you're trying to charge your car, you want to charge it in Arizona when the solar is working, which is when the sun is shining. So for different parts of the world, there's going to be different solutions. And I think that's why I get a little bit frustrated that we've put all of our eggs into this electric vehicle basket. I look at the Green New Deal and the thought process around that. 60% of the money that was going to be allocated in the Green New Deal was only renewables and EVs focused. How could we broaden the scope of this conversation and be investing all of these dollars that we're trying to invest, the hundreds of millions that California is dedicating each year to electric vehicles? Where could that money be going that maybe is thinking outside that box? And I think that that's something that would really help the environment, but also help different geographies that might not be as relevant to this sort of EV only mindset.
One of our audience members is concerned, I would say, about the role of rare earth metals in the manufacturing of batteries, and they wonder about the effect that the constraints the United States government puts on mining and manufacturing of those things in the U.S. are affecting the dynamic internationally. Whether the United States could pioneer new ways of doing both. How do you see that aspect of the debate?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act really puts a bold stake in the ground around this administration's goals for building out critical minerals mining and all the way through the supply chain to battery production and actually into the EV markets as well. So big manufacturing incentives, big new goals around forcing the hands of EV makers and battery producers to source from North America or free trade partners. I think when it first came out, there was a lot of shock around the battery and EV community here in the United States saying, it can't be done. And it actually can't be done. Right? And so rolling back and saying, well, maybe we'll put our toe in the water, and then we're going to put our ankle in the water, then we're going to put our foot and maybe our knee, in 10 years. I do think that's the right approach. As I outlined in my opening remarks, we are losing competitive advantage to notably China, that is really cornered the market globally, as your slides indicated, on critical minerals mining and production of component parts all the way down to the end use in the batteries and EV market globally, with half EVs being sold in China, produced in China, right, that are sold globally. So in my view, making making a 10-year horizon of market certainty for players that want to come in and develop new technologies, develop new mining rights, work within the U.S. regulatory framework, which is not going to be easy, by the way, but to make sure that there is actually an incentive at the end of that investment for all that time and permitting and stuff is super important if we ever want to have a place in the global market for critical minerals, battery supply chains. And we can't cede that. It's not just EVs. It's also about how the important role that batteries are going to play in storage for renewables. So I have a slide somewhere in my deck about the exponential rise in battery sales globally. And we can't sit that one out. And so this may not be the perfect right first step for us, but it's a necessary first step. And then we can improve on it with time. But there are a lot of people waking up and getting going in terms of building out battery factories. We had 2 before in 2019. Now we have 34 in this country that are either breaking ground or breaking ground in the next 2 years. That's the kind of move that the Inflation Reduction Act has made. If it weren't for that, we wouldn't be here with those kind of jobs and those kinds of economic opportunities around the country. And these are largely Midwestern states that are where those manufacturing plants are going in. You want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that we have to start taking steps to bring that back home. I guess there's 2 things I'm worried about when it comes to the supply chain with China and other countries. One is the cost. And the second is the effect to communities. There's a reason why China is dominating the market for this. It's because we don't want to hire slave labor and low cost labor, to understandably so, to power the mines and to employ the mines. Even though electric vehicles have, each one that's been sold has approximately been allocated $50,000 in U.S. subsidies that, by the way, you and I pay for as taxpayers, they're still too expensive with the slave labor, with the low human rights standards across the world. The United States will not be able to compete with China in Africa or elsewhere where they're funding a lot of this stuff. with its own labor because we have standards here. And so we're outsourcing it to other countries. And I don't know how we get to cost competitiveness there where we can be cost competitive, like it or not, on fossil fuels in a lot of ways. And so that's a real worry I have. The second worry I have is the community impact. So there's a mine in northern Arizona that I just toured. Very limited impact environmentally. You saw that picture. It did not look like that. It was about the size of the three of us in one elevator shaft down underground, and it was basically tunnels underground. And the Navajo Nation was blocking the transportation of the material from the mine to the processing center because they were upset that it was near their tribal land. And so, again, understandably, they want to have their priorities met as a tribe. But when China is doing this, they don't care about what people's thoughts are. They don't care about if African tribes are having their entire ecosystems screwed up. They don't care about if they tell someone in China, hey, we're going to mine this community, because you will get arrested if you protest it. Here, we're not even allowing mining to happen because none of the communities around the mining actually want it to happen. So I just worry that if we're truly going to scale electric vehicles in the way that has been asked for, that we cannot compete in terms of the cost and the human rights standpoint, just because other places are going to be able to do it cheaper. And when we buy an EV, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We're not thinking about those things, but it's happening somewhere. And I don't know how the U.S. ever catches up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree in terms of the labor issues, and those come often with environmental issues that can be devastating for whole regions, and especially in Africa, right, where so much of this mining takes place. I would say that if you look at what's going on internationally, this is not just a U.S. problem. This is a global problem, right? And so if you look at the discussions, and I talked about that concept of a battery passport, what's lacking right now is actually any idea of provenance for any rare earth element in any EV right now. So there's purposefully, right, a black box created around the supply chains for critical minerals that are used in batteries. And so the first thing we need to do is shine a bright light on those supply chains so that we can understand where they're coming from, what kind of labor practices are going on, what the environmental impacts are. And that, of course, is a precedent to creating an international framework that could create some standards, right, that you could say only this suite of entities are allowed to enter the U.S. market, right? In lieu of that, the administration has taken the step of just saying, well, we're going to have this ramp to more U.S. production of these minerals. Whether we'll ever get there in terms of the rise of our market demand for these minerals and the capacity that we would have to meet them may be unlikely, as you point out. But these are already things that are happening internationally. It doesn't take just the United States to make that. This is a global concern. And I do think that we'll be solving this in the next, few years now that EV sales are taking off so much internationally.
I agree that they're taking off, but there's also been a massive dip in EV sales over the last couple of years. And I think it was about 70% of EV owners said that they would consider not buying an EV the next time around because of a lot of these concerns. Just a recent study that came out that was in the New York Times and a bunch of publications that traditionally are pro EV. So I think we're seeing a very big dip in EV sales, and hybrids are scaling up. A lot of companies are backing away from EVs as what they say we're going to be 100% EV by this date, and now they're saying we want to be 30 or 40%. I guess what I go back to on this is if we're spending $50,000 of subsidies per EV that's been sold, of taxpayer dollars, is that worth it in this fight against climate change where $50,000 per item, that could get us a lot of progress somewhere else? And I guess, personal story anecdote is that I toured a mine in California, one of the only ones that's still around, and it was so expensive, even with Biden's subsidies on processing critical minerals in the United States, that they mine it in the United States, They send it over to China to process it, and then they mail it back to the United States for us to use in our materials for different solar panels, wind turbines, everything, phones, whatever it is. And that's with the subsidies. And so I guess my point is, if climate change is this serious threat, do we have time to wait 5 to 10 years to just start inching our way up on the supply chain when even with all the subsidies, we can't even get there? I just feel like we're wasting time, we're wasting money, and we're wasting resources, literal environmental resources, and I just worry that we're not getting the answers that we need.
A couple things there. First of all, EV sales are not down. There was a fall from Q4 to Q1 of this year that was quite precipitous. It led a lot of people to raise a lot of red flags. This is the beginning of the end. We've always seen it coming. Here it is. Q2 and 3 were right back up where projections were last year for this year, which is 20% growth in the US. Now they're saying this year would even be maybe 30% growth, exceeding last year's growth in terms of EV sales from 21 to 22, 22, 23, 23, 24. We've seen consistent 20% growth in this year-on-year markets in the United States. Globally, the number is even higher. So, we're seeing 35% growth in the EV market globally, and I have a slide on that, but let's not go there. The point is that this is going through the roof, and it's going through the roof with the critical mineral supply that we have right now. Is it everything we need it to be? No. Is it abundant and capable of meeting the demand of this soaring growth? Yes, it is. So we need to do two things at once, which we can do. We can shore up the supply chains, create transparency, improve practices for labor and environment while we continue to build out EVs. To the point about expensive subsidies, the issue that we're dealing with is that you have historically had relatively fewer cars in the United States for the investments of federal tax dollars, not just to the consumer on the EV side. Of course, the EV subsidy to consumers is not $50,000, but to the overall infrastructure required to operate EVs in this country. Yes, it's a big initial outlay for relatively few cars, but that's changing very quickly as EVs climb into more than 10% of the market share right now. And in the United States, by 2030, if the trend in growth continues, and there's no sign that it is slowing down year on year, we'll be seeing 1 in 3 cars in this country by 2030 being EVs, if that growth rate continues.
That's not what the car manufacturers even think anymore. I mean,
Well,
literally Toyota was one of the most bullish.
Toyota's not an EV proponent.
Well, they
Toyota's
were.
a hybrid. Well,
They were.
Toyota has put all their money in hybrids, so be careful who you listen to on that one.
Well, GM's also backed off their statement.
GM is releasing 2 new EVs at price points under $40K this year for the first time ever.
You can release new EVs, but they're saying that they do not want to get to 100%. They do not think that's going to happen. They don't even think it's going to be close to that. I know the leaders of both of those companies who basically admit that they were wrong about the scaling of EVs to what we're talking about. There's a reason why they're backing off of that, and that's because the demand is not going up at the scale that they thought it was going to at this point in the 2020s. And the data does show that. I mean, whether that's the decrease in demand, which I think we're looking at different statistics, but the fact that even 70% of EV owners are saying that they want to look at a different vehicle option the next time they go to buy a car is pretty alarming, and that's why a lot of these companies are backing off of it. My point.
Not familiar with that poll, but I'd love to see it.
It's remarkable that we are putting $50,000 of subsidies per EV at a time when we don't know what the supply chain is going to look like, that we have no idea. We have zero idea how that's going to go. At a time when hybrids took off on their own immediately without a lot of subsidies, and they made it onto the marketplace no problem. We've been subsidizing electric vehicles for like 30 years now, and it still isn't working. And even proponents of the Biden tax incentive are saying that maybe we should consider rolling that back because we're just waiving all these incentives to China because they can do it cheaper than here in the United States. So they basically are admitting that they were wrong about that.
Well, I think Joe Manchin has said the tough things, and he's been very tough on that tax plan. The tough thing about predictions is that only time,
Right.
tells whether they'll bear out. In that vein, though, I wanted to kind of touch on what I would consider the cultural side of the debate, which is, it's very easy, I think, to speak about utility and about, scientific efficiency. But do you think in the United States there may be a cultural barrier to adoption or proliferation of EVs because of people's sense of self-reliance? There was a famous exchange in Congress during a round of presentations by notable figures in which, there was a hurricane going on, much like there is one about to unfold in the United States, and people were asking about whether you would want to be driving an EV out or would you want to be driving a gas car out? And, there were different arguments in the room about whether you'd be so concerned about range anxiety or so on and so forth. So I would just be interested if you guys have different views on that subject and whether we need to change a narrative or not, or how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly when you say those talking points, I'm reminded of how for so long when I taught my climate solutions class, we were not energy independent as a nation. That's on the transportation fuel side, right? And so we were importing tons and tons of petroleum from places we didn't want to import it from, and now, we've flipped the script, and now we are thinking about exporting fossil fuels to other countries to fuel their energy growth. So I'm reminded of the importance of that drive and the technology that has brought us to where we are with fracking in terms of the abundance of fossil fuels in this country. So I think there's always going to be that cultural affinity to fossil fuels as a banner of national pride and kind of cultural affinity and this decades-long drive towards energy independence in this country. Having said that, as a pragmatist myself, it is very clear that if we could have a more distributed set of energy sources, for example, solar panels on my house, right? I have great resilience to shocks.
Not on a day like today.
Well, actually, on a day like today, it's perfectly fine. I still charge my cars on a day like today. But at any rate, the point is that I think that there's a case to be made for EVs as a vehicle for resilience. Actually, you can go talk to the Department of Defense about this. When you talk to them about what resilience means on the front lines, it doesn't mean petroleum and fossil fuels, right? It means microgrids, it means fuel cells, it means solar farms with EVs. So take it from them in terms of the functionality of resilience, and you talk about resilience, but I have to give it to you on the cultural kind of bellwether that is fossil fuels and whether we will ever be ready to think about a world where our transportation, our iconic symbol of America, the car, is not primarily fueled by fossil fuels. I hope we get there.
And honestly, I hope we get there too. I just am very skeptical that's going to happen. And I used to, like I said, I started out not believing that it was impossible. But I do think that we're oversimplifying this. And so the example that I'll give is California. So I toured a coal facility in Utah, which told me that 80% of their power at night goes to California because they can't power their grid at night to charge the electric vehicles and to power people's homes when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. Now, that kind of opened up my eyes to the fact that, okay, so it does matter when people charge their cars, because when Californians are going home after a long day of work and they're charging it after the day of work and the sun has gone down, that's actually using fossil fuels from the grid to power the electric vehicle. So then I started looking into California and where they're getting their fossil fuels from, because I'm like, well, if they're getting them from Utah, they must be getting them from other places. Over 60% of the fossil fuels they import come from Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. So they've shut down nuclear, they've shut down natural gas, they've shut down coal in their own state where they would have done it cleaner than anywhere else. And now they're importing it from countries that have zero environmental standards. And not all fossil fuels are created the same. Russia has a 2 times bigger emissions portfolio on their natural gas than the United States. It's 2 times more environmentally harmful because they don't have the same technologies and standards that we do. So California is now importing all of that when they used to be producing it themselves. So instead of powering the electric vehicles with fossil fuels or nuclear, which I love, they're now looking at other countries and relying on them. At the same time, they're saying, we're going to ban the sale of hybrids and internal combustion engines in this state by 2030 or 2035. I think they moved it back to 2035. So they're forcing people to choose an electric vehicle at a time when they can't even meet their own energy demand, even close to meet their own energy demand. I live in Arizona. Our nuclear plant mostly sends our energy to California because they don't have enough energy. So when you talk about energy independence, if you want to charge electric vehicles on the grid, or you want to power data centers, you want to do anything else, it's not even an electric vehicle thing, you need to have reliable, affordable energy for people to use so that they can actually do the things they need to do. But when you're hitching your solution to just EVs, just renewables, it actually tends to backfire. And again, as someone who cares deeply about climate change, there's a reason why California's carbon emissions are really struggling to go down at a time when other states are not struggling, and it's because they have siphoned themselves off into this narrow-minded view. And I worry that that's with the mindset of kind of like, it's not just that we want to have fossil fuels culturally in the United States, it's that most people still rely on them to survive. It's not, I don't want to get off of, I don't want to stay on fossil fuels because I'm the Texas, oil country guy. I don't have any affinity to fossil fuels whatsoever. I do not lose any masculinity cards for not having a fossil fuel driven car. I don't need a big truck that, gets smoke in the air and makes you want to, cough up your lung. Like, I just want to have reliable energy to feed my family and go to work, right? That's what people want. It's not a cultural affiliation with fossil fuels. They want reliable, affordable energy. And when we're telling people that they don't deserve to have a choice between the energy that they have, the type of car they drive, that is not good for the environment, and it's also not good for humanity.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. And what you're trying to drive towards there is, in my view, an important distinction between baseload electricity production to fuel our lives, renewables, which are episodic and time-dependent through the day, through the week, et cetera, intermittent, and then storage, which in this country is virtually non-existent. And so we have to kind of remind ourselves where we are in the infancy of our transition away from fossil fuels, which used to be 100% baseload electricity supply in this country from mostly fossil fuels and a small portion nuclear. That was not so long ago. That was literally like 15 years ago, pretty much. And now we have solar and wind creeping up to 20% compared to before 0. And we have natural gas, of course, which is both baseload and peaking power, right? And then we have no storage. And storage is the piece that's going to solve this issue. And when you talk to people at Georgia Power, where I spent 18 years talking to people at Georgia Power, I used to have the VP of Environmental Affairs come into my class and talk to my students about where we are in this transition, right? And he was as bullish as ever, right? We're going to get there, but the only way we're going to get there is with large-scale deployment of storage to help balance these issues and make sure that the lights come on when you flick the switch. And that's the only thing that most Americans care about, is that the light turns on when you flick the switch. And that's Georgia Power's first and most important role. So they are building out huge storage facilities in Georgia right now. Of course, Governor Kemp, I mentioned, moving very quickly into battery technologies. This is what's going to solve this issue that Benji was rightly referring to. But just to note that this is a transitional phase, and it shouldn't mean that we turn our backs on our EV and renewables future. It just means that we need to have smart grids and storage to help solve this problem.
I guess I'll believe it when I see it, because I haven't seen storage at any scale work.
True. Totally true.
So you can't bank on something that doesn't exist yet.
Well, they're being built out in Georgia right now, but it's it's going to take.
Well,
5
they're
or
also
10 years.
building electric airplanes, and that's not something that we can count on either. So like.
True.
So, I mean, we can build anything, but whether or not that actually works is a different thing. And there's a reason why Microsoft has a huge need for power with data centers for the AI memes that we're all generating all the time, and that they chose to reopen the biggest nuclear, natural nuclear disaster plant in American history, and they didn't say we're going to plant more solar. We're not going to plant more solar or plant more wind turbines. There's a reason they did that.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why in Arizona, where power demand is expected to 1.5 times or double over the next few years, largely because of AI and data centers, but also there's more EVs and everything, that they're choosing natural gas and nuclear. They're not saying that they're going to put more solar and wind because they've kind of maxed that out at this point, unless storage works. So I think, again, it's similar to, we're kind of trending towards an energy conversation too here.
Yeah.
But to me, the conversation around energy and EVs are very similar, which is that you cannot put all your eggs in the renewables basket, and you cannot put all your eggs in the EV basket. You need a mix of everything. And when you don't have a mix of everything, people lose, and the environment loses. There's a reason China is leading the world in renewables production and build out, but they're also building more coal plants, nuclear plants, natural gas facilities. They're funding everywhere. They're doing it all. They're not just making EVs. They're also pumping out hybrids and internal combustion engines because they know that it's going to be a mixture of these things. And for some reason, we think it's going to be all one way or all the other way. And both Republicans and Democrats have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to that.
I mean, I think that those are all really eloquent responses, and they just remind me that being a coal or a fossil fuel consumer is not the same everywhere in the world. I did my Fulbright in Kosovo, where I had to part of the year heat my home with brown lignite. And I have to say that was such a fundamentally different experience than being an American consumer who primarily. So it's fascinating to hear these fine-grained, points about what it means to be a fossil fuel consumer. There is one question, Benji, that I think is directed partly at you, which draws on that issue of the basket of things we need to do. And I guess this person is really interested, it seems, in what you would rank order as the top 2 things, if not EVs. And I'm just going to combine it with another question, which is, you mentioned nuclear. Where is that in this picture? And as an environmentalist, what do you think about that?
So I appreciate the question. First of all, I'll answer the second question first. I used to be against nuclear, and I also used to be against fossil fuels. And I used to think that it was just all going to be renewables, just like I used to think it was going to be all EVs. So again, I'm coming at this from a point of it's not like I'm hooked to these technologies. And anytime there's an opportunity to learn and change course, I'm willing to do it, and I think we all should be. We cannot meet any of the demand that we have in this country for energy or across the world without nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is the key to having reliable, clean energy at this point. It is the only reliable, clean energy source that you can pretty much place anywhere in the world. Hydropower is also reliable, but you need water. So I live in Arizona. There's not a lot of that. So nuclear is absolutely critical. Now, the problem with nuclear is that it takes a while to build, and it's somewhat expensive, especially up front. And it costs a lot of people a lot of money up front, and it ends up being pretty cost-effective in the long run. But you look at what happened in Georgia, where they built the last nuclear facility, and it took 15 years, and it took more billions than they would have ever imagined. Partially that's because nuclear is expensive, and partially that's because of government red tape and stupid regulations and lawsuits, but it's both, and there's a problem there. But there's a reason why, again, when Microsoft needed power, they went to nuclear. So nuclear is absolutely critical, and we have to have that as part of the equation. There's a lot of really great small module technologies, smaller nuclear reactor technologies that are coming online. Bill Gates just unveiled the first one in Wyoming. It's a smaller facility, but it generates a lot of power. And there's some that are like the size of this floor, and it could power an entire city. And if there was the size of this entire room, it would power an entire county in a major metropolitan area. So there's a lot of really cool technologies coming online, but per my conversation earlier about battery storage, it's not there yet. So you can't count on it until it's there. And I'm the biggest nuclear proponent ever, and I'm not going to say that we should count on it because it's not there yet. we should reopen closed nuclear facilities. That's step one. Step two is we should finish the nuclear facilities that were abandoned because we didn't finish them. There's a few of those out there too. And we should absolutely not close any more nuclear facilities anywhere. It would be the dumbest possible decision from an energy standpoint and from a climate standpoint. To go to the first question about what I would do on transportation is I would, literally the top two things would be keep investing in technology to limit the trade-offs of EVs. There's trade-offs to every single thing that we do in life. There's limits to absolutely every single energy source. The role of entrepreneurs and technology and the free market and capitalism should be solving those trade-offs. So what sort of cool technologies can come online to decrease the trade-offs that we are talking about on EVs? That should be step one. Step two would be I would encourage everyone, if they're looking at buying a new vehicle, especially if it's not in a place where there's 100% clean energy or even close, to get a hybrid. That is what I would tell people to do. Because I drive a hybrid for that reason. I was so excited to buy an electric vehicle because I thought that was going to be my first car. I bought a plug-in hybrid solely because of all the problems that we're talking about here. And until those are alleviated, I do not think it's the best environmental decision. I think hybrids are the best environmental decision and that they lower emissions far better in the short term. Hopefully, that's not the case in the long term. But I've yet to see proof of that, and so those would be the two things. So again, I'm not anti-EVs. I think we should keep investing in the solutions to make them better, but I do not think they're there yet, which is why I would tell people to buy hybrids.
A lot there. A lot of which we agree on. So I'm very bullish on nuclear as well. That's that.
Then we can just leave.
Yeah, right. We should just stop there.
But that was the question, right? Should we do nuclear?
One of them.
No, that was the poll, right? It wasn't about EVs. It was about whether or not.
Yeah, so I won't reiterate what Benji said because mostly I agree with what he said. I would point to the role for small modular reactors in this country, but I would note that the barriers are not really technological. These are being plunked in all over the world, right? It's there. It's cost effective. It's safer than these monsters that we've been relying on since the 1950s design builds. Unfortunately, those are the only kinds of plants that you can get permitted in this country right now. So this is a permitting issue primarily. And so, we talk incessantly in DC about permitting reform. If you hear that, maybe perk your ears up because these are the kinds of issues that are holding us back, not just in nuclear, but in many other ways. We can't get utility scale solar farms clicked onto the grid because of permitting and things like this. There are huge barriers of red tape. Yes, there's a lot of red tape. So when you hear permitting reform and you start to fall asleep, wake up, listen, learn, get involved, because that is really one of the issues that's holding us back. And I can't defend that, and we need to focus on that. To the point about EVs versus hybrids. When you go and you see the stickers on the hybrids, right, and then you go to the gas cars, you look at the stickers, you're like, I'm not impressed with that difference, I hope, right? Like, it's pretty marginal. And I do note that hybrids have batteries too. So
very small ones.
Yeah, but they do have batteries too. So we're still tied up in some of these issues, and we're not really getting to the bottom of the issue when we just look for a smaller battery, when we're not getting that emissions bang for our buck, from that investment anyway. So that's just I had a hybrid before I went electric as well. I drove a Prius for many years.
You downgraded.
I don't know about that,
So my hybrid is like the size of, it's a monster car. I wanted to bring it off-roading, which is why I have it. It's a 3-row SUV, and it gets 65 miles per gallon. My old SUV that had the same layout was from 2014, and it got 19 miles per gallon. Mm-hmm. That's not a small change. That means I'm filling up 4 times less than I was before, 4 times less emissions. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to make that trade any day. And I think that's why it's like, this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. If I was contributing 100% of emissions then, but now I'm doing 25%, I'm lowering my carbon footprint by 75% for this one vehicle purchase. I mean, that's a really big difference. So I don't think it's a small potatoes thing, and
it can be in some cases. Maybe
Right.
you chose well. So I don't want to throw hybrids under the bus. Like, that's not what this is about, right? Like, because we are trying to transition away from full internal combustion engines here. So don't take that as to the bank. But I am saying for those of you who are going to be consumers, take a look at EVs. They have come a really long way, and for your money, they're the biggest emissions reduction that you're going to get. That's what I would say. And you're taking advantage of a lot of investments that are at your back as well, as Benji would decry.
50,000 per.
Well, I guess as we reach sort of the end of our moderated discussion, I guess the penultimate question to ask. Oh, well, we have your closing statements too. So
That's it. Like time's flying.
Yes, it is. I know. When you're having
Maybe
fun,
it's just
Benji,
for us.
when you're
Maybe
having
you guys
fun.
are like, thank God, it's almost over.
But no, I mean, so I guess a lot of people are wondering, how would you characterize the other's position, and where do you see the disagreement laying? Because as I've listened to your very thoughtful responses, it seems that this is really about strategy and about different assumptions, but maybe I'm mistaken. When you first chatted about the debate, you talked about asterisks in agreeing or disagreeing with the resolution. So where do those lie? And Dr. Cobb, if you would start us off there.
Yeah, I mean, I hope what you've heard is that, there's actually a lot of agreement between Benji and I in terms of the pressing need to move away from our current emissions trajectory, the role for advanced technologies in solving some of these problems for us. I'm a big proponent of American innovation entrepreneurship. It's gotten us this far, and it's going to get us the distance. The question is, on what time scale? And, how can government assist and not hurt? Right? Also something that we've talked about in several cases. So, I think from my perspective, I see a future where these projections are largely met, where these promises are largely kept, and where the American appetite for technological innovation in the form of EVs, in the form of battery storage and vehicle-to-grid, smart home systems is accelerating and adopted at scale because people are drawn to be part of the solution in a fundamental way. That's what people want to do. They want to be part of the solution. As long as it doesn't tank our economy, as long as it doesn't hurt our environment, they want to be part of the solution. That's what I hear as a climate change, public speaker everywhere I go. Dr. Cobb, what can I do? What should I do? My answer is always the same. Is what Benji said. Really depends on your circumstances. There is no one size fits all in this room. There's no one size fits all state by state. We're on our way though. We are well on our way. And so many of the technologies that have been projected to go and penetrate slowly into low carbon space are smashing through the roof. And that's the bottom line. PV is like that, wind is like that, EVs are like that. Whenever projections say, well, it's going to be slow and maybe it's going to fizzle, it never does. It hasn't for 10 years. So there's cause to be optimistic. There's cause to lean in. We need to do so as consumers, and we need to do so as policy levers at every single level of government. And that's happening. But we need to there are some leaps along the way, and there's going to be some missteps, and there's going to be some unique challenges like the critical minerals one that lie in our way. But I think we can close those gaps, and in 5 or 10 years we'll look back and say, this was the right path to have taken. I truly believe that for our country.
Well, I really appreciate the question, because I think, what I would attribute your argument as is that, we both want to reduce carbon emissions as quickly and affordably as possible, and you believe that on the transportation side, that will be met largely through these electric vehicle investments working out, and that the adoption will go as it was planned, in the years prior. And so, again, I totally, that's why there is so much alignment, because I can see where you're coming from, and I also would love that too. I guess I'm just incredibly skeptical that that's going to happen. And I do think that the data and the current realities have proven that. I think that the critical mining restrictions and limitations, the grid and the reliability of different energy sources. I was in a meeting last week where the public utility in Arizona is considering all options, including opening up new coal plants or expired coal plants, because they cannot meet the energy demand in the state. And so that's not EV's fault, but it is a reality. And so in a world where energy demand is increasing, and we're increasingly unable to meet that demand through clean energy, I do not believe the investment to EVs that substantially is worth the dollars that we're spending. Do I believe that the private sector and a lot of people could figure out solutions to the drawbacks that we're talking about? Yes. Do I think EVs could make it in the way that you're talking about? Yes. But I do not think that we should be putting the cart before the horse here and spending taxpayer dollar after taxpayer dollar after taxpayer dollar when inflation is already really bad to subsidize something that just isn't there yet. And that in a world where we're putting more fossil fuels onto the grid, which is going to happen over the next 5 years, I will bet anybody that we will have more fossil fuels on the grid, or at least the same, in the next 5 years, unless the nuclear stuff can figure itself out very quickly, that somehow putting all of our money into EVs is going to solve the climate challenge. It is not going to solve the climate challenge. And if you're putting $50,000 per EV of our dollars in, I can guarantee you I can find somewhere better to place it. And that's coming from someone who cares about climate change and cares about EVs and wants them to succeed. But I also don't want to waste dollars and time on things that aren't necessarily going to have as big of an impact as other areas, which we didn't get into tonight, but there are plenty of areas to make an impact on. The $50,000 per product would go a long way.
Definitely impassioned responses to characterizing the other side. As I was listening to you speak about your kind of unified position on nuclear, I was recalling interactions I had in Germany while living there as a research fellow, and I'm just struck by how many passionate environmentalists I know there who really cannot get on board with nuclear. And oftentimes they would say things to me like, the trade-off for me is that I, lose my sense of who I am and my sense of personal security, given that there's something down the road for me that I think is very dangerous and has a terrible legacy in terms of impacting humanity in negative ways. And to me, that seemed like something of an abstraction, but I say this because it's difficult to talk about trade-offs, and that's what I want to direct the last question to be, because so many people in the audience are interested in trade-offs. How do we justify a big carbon footprint for something that will ultimately enable an EV future? Or how do we step back from the investments we've already made? Is that a trade-off? How do we think about momentum in terms of either speeding up or slowing down? And so if you could just address aspects of that kind of trade-off that seems to be built into both sides of your arguments and tell us a little bit about how we should think about them, that'd be great.
I guess, I think, first of all, no one's willing to accept that there are trade-offs in politics anymore. It's all or nothing all the time. And, you have these Republicans who say, drill, baby, drill. There's nothing else out there for you guys. It's just fossil fuels, and those are the only things that are going to power our world because they've gotten us here and they're going to get us there. That's a lie. It's also a lie when Democrats say that EVs and renewables are this panacea, and that if we went 100% to that overnight, which we somehow can do, that we'd all be able to live a healthier, better life. Also a lie. And so I think at the very least, what we're talking about, like you're acknowledging the trade-offs of electric vehicles in a different way than I am, but you're acknowledging them. And I do think that, first of all, our policymakers need to acknowledge the trade-offs, because right now they're not. And so when you put all your eggs into one basket on either side, everyone loses. If you're in the South and you're refusing renewables because you have this stigma around them, like they have the stigma for nuclear in Germany, that is false. There's some truth to it, but it's mostly false. Then you are limiting energy choice for humans that need more options and more cost-effective energy. And there are literally states that are banning investments from clean energy because they see it as a political win for them. That is super foolish and backwards. And just like I see California saying that we aren't going to do nuclear or natural gas and we're going to ban any non-EVs, to me that's incredibly backwards too. And both have a negative consequence on the environment. And they both have a negative consequence on humanity. So I think we have to be realistic in the conversation about trade-offs. You and I both come at it from a different standpoint, but I can guarantee you that you're not avoiding the trade-offs, and I'm not avoiding the trade-offs either. I can acknowledge every single trade-off from fossil fuels and nuclear and solar and wind and EVs and internal combustion engines. They all have trade-offs. And to pretend that anything doesn't have trade-offs is a blatant lie. So I do think that we're being misled in a lot of ways, and it's important to acknowledge the trade-offs because it also establishes trust. I was at a meeting with Republican elected officials and clean energy companies talking about how to keep certain provisions of the IRA, because I'm supportive of a lot of them. And the Republicans were supportive of this in the room, and they're like, and the companies were like, how do we convince your colleagues to be for this? And like, acknowledge that there are faults with these investments, acknowledge that they're not perfect, acknowledge that wind and solar aren't perfect, because when you go in there and you act like they're this end-all be-all, they're going to save the world, they're going to poke every single hole in it possible because they know that you're lying to them. So I think acknowledging the trade-offs is really critical, and it's something that I think we've both showcased today is at least possible in 2024.
Totally agree with that. Thanks, Benji. I would just also end by saying something that kind of echoes threading some points that you both made around where we are in this country and our way forward. And this has to do, TLDR with bipartisan action on climate, right? The importance of moving in a compromised position. Obviously, hopefully, shared sets of facts help. But I will say one thing that I learned in cramming for my debate today was, going to harken back to the Yale climate opinion maps that some of you may have come across. There's an incredible website. You can learn all about what people think in this country about climate change and its harm or lack thereof and solutions. And one thing that I found today that was funny from 2023 is talk about the discourse of where we are. Really only 58% of people in this country think that humans are causing the majority of global warming, okay? So just keep that statistic in your head for a minute and think about that for a second. In 2023, this was a poll from last year. And then when the pollers asked the same people if they supported tax rebates on EV cars and solar panels, 74% of them said yes. The same people, okay? And when they asked them if they supported regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant, 74% of them said, yes, I support regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant in this country, okay? So, how do you get those answers to be the case? You have a history of politicization of an issue and 2 words, global warming, that is a litmus test for your partisan identity and your value system. And then on the solution side, you say, oh yeah, that solar panels are a good thing. EVs are less emitting. That's a good thing. You're reaching for those solutions. You want to see them enacted, but you're not going to go say humans are causing global warming. So what do we take from that? First of all, I hope you remember that because that's going to stay in my brain for a long time. But that means that the way forward is to make sure that when we're talking about solutions, we're not talking about them as a litmus test for partisan purity. Right? EVs, your support for EVs doesn't make you a bad Republican, right? Or your support for nuclear doesn't make you a bad Democrat. Right? We need to move forward with a bipartisan understanding of what the stakes are and the benefit of embracing any number of solutions, some of which Benji feels more strongly about, some of which I feel more strongly about, but I'm pretty sure we could craft an amazing bill for Congress. Right?
This is what needs to happen in Congress. We need to be debating the solutions instead of the problem. They need to be having this conversation, and they're not.
Right, and so when we think about the polls this November, we think about whatever happens afterwards in the next years, I'd like you guys to kind of think about what you can take from this conversation and remember that the only way forward to the kind of durable, equitable, effective climate action solutions are going to come from bipartisan frameworks. I promise you that. So how can you plug in? Where do you plug in? There are many ways you could plug in, but try to plug in and try to move that needle because that's where it's going to have to be.
One last blatant point on the needle that needs to be said is that in 1990, 80% of Americans self-identified as environmentalists. 80%. Today that number is 39%. That's with Gen Z and millennials being part of the adult, voter block, and of course prioritizing this issue. So what happened? People didn't just start hating the environment. It became a partisan identity. And we have to take the environment and climate change out of the culture wars because if we don't, we're not going to be able to have conversations like this. We are giving our legislators a pass by keeping it in the culture wars because they can do this oversimplified litmus testing and no one cares when it has an effect on all of us, and we have to take it out of that if we're ever going to succeed.
Well, I think it's time to move on to our closing statements, but before we do that, I just want to, well, I mean, if you guys just like to rest your cases, I mean, you can go up in there. Yeah.
I can rest the case.
Yeah. But more importantly, folks, I mean, it's very important that we hear from you and how you feel about how the debate went and where your opinion lies now. So do take a moment, if you have those cards with you, to vote on the outcome and tell us whether your opinion stayed the same or changed, and I'll be sure to report those out to our virtual listeners. So.
I guess my closing statement would just be an add-on to the last thing I just said, which is that this, if you care about climate change or not, this conversation has such bigger ramifications than just climate change. It has an impact on our national security, the energy that we have that powers our homes, how we transport ourselves to work, how we grow our food. I mean, this topic impacts us in so many different ways. And so the partisanship on the issue of climate is so much bigger than just climate change, if you believe in climate change or not. It has to do with everything that we care about as Americans and as human beings. And whether or not you think the hurricane is due to climate change or partially due to climate change or it has nothing to do with climate change, if our politicians are constantly debating whether or not it's even real to begin with and they're not actually talking about solutions that impact all of us, then we're going to have a really hard time competing internationally. We're going to all be worse off for it. And that's how it's been. That's how the conversation's been for the last 20 years. And it's not working. So something has to change. And hopefully tonight gave you inspiration that it's at least possible in this room.
I'll guess give my little kind of closing statement that I love to say, which is, you know, people are like, how do you keep going, Dr. Cobb? You're a climate scientist. You know, you nerd out on all these horrific details. I do nerd out on all the details. But, you know, to me, it's such an amazing opportunity to be alive in this moment where this decade, we're going to decide, by and large, over the next decade, you know, the fate of our planet for millennia to come. And I'm not overstating that. I'm saying that as a climate scientist who knows stuff. And like that can feel very sobering and overwhelming, but it can also feel like really empowering. Like, wow, this is an amazing moment to be alive. And so as a climate scientist, I'm also fond of following up that statement by saying, reminding folks that, you know, if we get this right, we could be ushering in global cooling, you know, by mid-century, give or take. And that's very real. That's very tomorrow. And so, you know, what are the pieces that have to fall in place to get it right? And that's what we're fighting for. That's what I wake up every single day, all day, every day, fighting for that outcome. So I'd love to have y'all join us.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're moving towards the exciting moment of the reveal of our post-debate poll. So if you'll join me in giving our speakers a round of applause. So if our tech folks will project those up there. All right. So for the pre-debate poll, we had a pretty even split. 30% agreed, 26% disagreed, and 43% were undecided. And after the debate, we had 39% in agreement, 33% disagreeing, and 28% undecided. And that, once again, was be it resolved, electric vehicles are good for the planet. Well, I have to say I learned a lot from that poll, just as I did from our conversation this evening. So thank you so much again for your attention. And
Don't stop the count.
Oh.
I just got some late votes.
22%.
I paged a few people.
Oh my.
We need a recount,
Yeah, yeah,
stop, pause.
Yeah. So I'm going to hand it off to Haley now. Thank you so much.
Sure, yeah. For confidence in our polling, you can all rest assured that the final results will be in the final YouTube video, and I believe they get posted on our website afterwards. So don't worry, there's no need for a recount. We will have the final results honestly projected on the YouTube video following this debate. Please all join me in another round of applause for our speakers. I have to say, this may be the first debate that we've foregone real closing statements because you found so much common ground throughout the debate, which I think is just remarkable, a testament to both of you as debaters. So thank you so much for participating in it. I also want to extend another thank you to Ben with College Republicans at Brown for all that they did to make this possible and their help supporting this event, as well as all of our other university partners. I also want to again thank our foundation supporters and the individuals for their generosity who've made this debate possible. If you enjoyed this debate as a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, I'm obliged to say I hope you will consider supporting this with a donation of your own. We couldn't have these debates without the generosity of our supporters around the country. So if you enjoyed this conversation, found it meaningful, and feel like you'll take a lot away from it, please consider joining us in these efforts. Lastly, if you enjoyed this debate, consider watching another one of our debates. We have 6 more. You can find the full schedule online. We live stream all of them, post them on YouTube afterwards, and have an opportunity for you to host watch parties. So while maybe you can't be on campus like you were this time, you can watch it with friends, get together in person, and still have an incredible experience. So you can find all those details and more at steamboatinstitute.org. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you to those who joined us online, and please stick around for the meet and greet, and I think there's pizza available afterwards. Thank you.